The numbers don't lie. They never do. Right now, today, January 19th, 2026, 27% of Americans have absolutely zero emergency savings. Not a dollar, not a dime. Nothing. 59% cannot cover a $1,000 emergency expense without going into debt. The personal savings rate has collapsed to 4.4%, the lowest in modern history. And while you're watching cable news argue about politics, while you're scrolling social media looking at vacation photos, the American middle class is being systematically dismantled by forces that most people don't even know exist. This isn't a prediction about some distant future. This is operational reality unfolding across kitchen tables in Ohio, across bank accounts in Texas, across retirement portfolios that people spent 30 years building and watched evaporate in 18 months. When I show you the timeline, when I connect the $38.43 trillion national debt to the 9.1% dollar devaluation in 2025, to the BRICS payment systems going live in 2027, you will understand why 85% is not hyperbole. It's mathematics. Cold, brutal, undeniable mathematics that says if you're holding dollars, if you're trusting the system, if you're waiting for someone to save you, you're already too late. Let me start with a question that should terrify you. How many paychecks away from homelessness are you right now? For 53% of Americans, the answer is 2. They're living paycheck to paycheck with no buffer, no safety net, no margin for error, one medical emergency, one car repair, one unexpected job loss. That's all it takes. And this isn't just affecting low-income households. 32.3% of people earning over $100,000 per year are living paycheck to paycheck. That's right, 6-figure salaries, and they still can't save money. Why? Because the cost of living is rising faster than wages. Because housing has become unaffordable. Because the purchasing power of the dollar is evaporating while everyone pretends everything is fine. The Federal Reserve tells you inflation is under control at 3%, but your grocery bill says otherwise. Your rent says otherwise. Your insurance premiums say otherwise. Real inflation, the inflation you actually feel when you try to buy food and shelter and transportation, is running at 8 to 12% annually, which means your money is losing value faster than you can earn it. Now let me show you what's happening at the government level, because this is where the house of cards begins to collapse. The United States national debt just crossed $38.43 trillion. Let me say that again so it sinks in. $38.43 trillion. That number is so large it has lost all meaning. So let me break it down in terms that matter. The debt is growing at $8.03 billion per day. Not per month, per day. That's $334.48 million per hour, $5.57 million per minute, $92,912 per second. Every single second, while you're reading these words, the United States government is borrowing another $93,000 that it can never repay. And here's where it gets absolutely insane. The government is now spending $1.22 trillion per year just on interest payments. Not on schools, not on roads, not on defense, just interest, just the cost of servicing the debt. That's 13.85% of the entire federal budget going to pay the rent on money they already spent. And that percentage is rising. By 2028, interest payments will consume 14.52% of the budget, which means less money for everything else, less for Social Security, less for Medicare, less for veterans, less for you. But wait, it gets worse, because the debt isn't just growing, it's accelerating. In January 2025, the debt was $36.18 trillion. 1 year later, January 2026, it's $38.43 trillion. That's an increase of $2.25 trillion in 12 months. And the Congressional Budget Office projects that by 2027, the debt will hit $41 trillion. By 2030, $50 trillion. This is a debt spiral. This is what happens when a government can no longer fund its operations through taxation and must borrow exponentially to stay afloat. And here's the part. Nobody wants to say out loud, this debt can never be repaid. Not through austerity, not through taxation, not through growth. The math doesn't work. The only way out is inflation, devaluing the currency until the debt becomes manageable in nominal terms, but worthless in real terms, which means your savings, your salary, your retirement account, all of it gets devalued alongside the debt. You pay the price for their borrowing. Now let me connect this to what's happening in your actual bank account. 27% of Americans have zero emergency savings. Zero. That's 90 million people, 90 million adults living with no financial cushion whatsoever. And it's not because they're irresponsible, it's because they can't afford to save. 73% of Americans say they're saving less due to inflation. Not because they don't want to save, because inflation is eating their paycheck before they can put anything aside. The average American with credit card debt owes $7,321 and is paying 22.83% interest. Think about that interest rate. 22.83%. That's loan shark territory. And it's legal. It's the new normal. So you've got 90 million people with no savings and 41% of adults carrying high interest debt that they can't pay down because all their income goes to rent and food and gas. Now add this to the equation. Household debt just hit $18.59 trillion. That's mortgages, student loans, auto loans, credit cards, all of it. $18.59 trillion. And the debt service ratio, the percentage of disposable income going to debt payments, is 11.2%, which doesn't sound terrible until you realize that disposable income is already low because wages aren't keeping up with costs. So you've got people earning $40,000 per year, paying $4,480 per year just in debt service, while also trying to afford rent that's gone up 30% in 5 years. The math doesn't work. People are one crisis away from default. And when defaults start cascading, when people can't pay their credit cards and their car loans and their mortgages all at once, the banking system seizes. Just like it did in 2008. Except this time, there's no bailout coming. The government is already bankrupt. The Fed already printed $15 trillion since 2020. They can't print another $15 trillion without destroying the currency completely. Now let me show you what's happening to the dollar itself, because this is the linchpin of the entire system. In 2025, the dollar fell 9.1% against a basket of major currencies. That's the worst annual performance since 2017. The dollar index, which measures the greenback against euros, yen, pounds, and other currencies, dropped from 109 in January 2025 to 99.8 in January 2026. And experts are predicting it will fall to 94 by mid-2026. Morgan Stanley is calling for a volatile year with continued weakening in the first half. Why? Because the Federal Reserve is cutting interest rates. And when interest rates go down, the value of currency goes down. It's basic economics. Lower rates mean lower returns on dollar-denominated assets, which means foreign investors don't want to hold dollars. They sell dollars and buy euros or yuan or gold. And when everybody's selling dollars, the price collapses. But here's what makes this truly catastrophic. The dollar's decline isn't just cyclical, it's structural. For 80 years, the dollar has been the world's reserve currency. Every country holds dollars. Every central bank keeps dollar reserves. Every commodity from oil to wheat to copper is priced in dollars. This created artificial demand. Countries needed dollars to trade, so they accumulated dollars, which kept the value high even when the US was running massive deficits. But that system is breaking right now in real time, and it's breaking because of BRICS, Brazil, Russia, India, China, South Africa, plus 9 new members including Saudi Arabia, UAE, Egypt, Ethiopia, and Iran. These countries represent 47.9% of the global population and 37% of global GDP. And they just announced they're building an alternative financial system to replace the dollar. Not in 10 years, not in 5 years. Right now, the BRICS pay system is already live. It connects Russia's SPFS, China's CIPS, and India's UPI into one unified payment network. Russia and China now settle 90% of their trade in rubles and yuan, not dollars. Brazil and China eliminated the dollar from their bilateral trade. India bought crude oil from the UAE in rupees. These aren't test programs. These are operational realities. Billions of dollars worth of trade is now happening outside the dollar system. And it's accelerating. In October 2025, BRICS launched the unit. It's a digital settlement currency backed 40% by gold and 60% by a basket of BRICS national currencies. It's designed for cross-border trade, and it completely bypasses the dollar. Companies in China can now pay companies in Brazil using the unit. No dollars, no SWIFT, no American banks, just direct settlement between central banks using a gold-backed digital token. And the pilot program is already processing transactions. BRICS countries dumped $28.8 billion in U.S. treasuries in late 2025. They're actively selling American debt and moving into gold. BRICS nations now control over 6,000 tons of gold in their central bank reserves. And they're targeting 65 to 70% of global gold reserves by 2027. This is resource nationalism on a scale we've never seen. And it's aimed directly at the dollar. Here's why this matters to you. When foreign countries stop buying U.S. debt, when they stop holding dollars, when they build alternative payment systems that don't need dollars, the value of the dollar collapses. And when the dollar collapses, everything priced in dollars becomes more expensive. Your gas, your food, your electronics, your medicine, everything. Because America doesn't produce much anymore. We import 70% of what we consume. We import from China, from Mexico, from Southeast Asia, and we pay for it with dollars. But if those countries don't want dollars anymore, if they demand yuan or the unit or gold, then we have to buy those currencies first. Which means we have to sell dollars. which drives the dollar down further. It's a death spiral, and we're already in it. Now let me show you the timeline, because this is where it becomes undeniable. January 2026. The dollar is at 99.8. BRICS Pay is operational. The unit pilot is live. American household savings are at historic lows. Debt is at historic highs. The government is borrowing $8 billion per day just to stay open. First quarter 2026. The Federal Reserve continues cutting rates. The dollar falls to 96. BRICS trade in local currencies increases to 75% of intra-block commerce. China announces it will accept yuan for all oil purchases from Saudi Arabia and UAE. This removes another $200 billion per year of demand for U.S. currency. The petrodollar system, which has sustained the dollar for 50 years, is officially dead. Second quarter, 2026, the dollar hits 94. U.S. inflation, which the Fed claimed was controlled, starts rising again. Not because of demand, because of currency devaluation. When your currency loses value, imports cost more. When imports cost more, prices rise. The Fed is trapped. If they raise rates to support the dollar, they crash the economy. If they keep cutting rates, the dollar keeps falling. They choose to keep cutting because they're more afraid of recession than inflation. Bad choice. Third quarter 2026, the dollar is at 91. BRICS announces that the unit is now fully operational for all member countries. 25% of global trade is now happening outside the dollar system. American companies start demanding price increases because their costs in yuan and euros have risen. Inflation hits 6% officially. Real inflation, the kind you feel at the grocery store, is 12%. Wages don't keep up. The middle class starts defaulting on debt. Fourth quarter, 2026, the dollar is at 88. 40% of Americans have zero savings. Credit card default rates spike to 8%. Auto loan defaults hit 6%. The banking system starts showing stress. Regional banks report losses. The Fed announces emergency measures. They offer liquidity support. They try to stabilize the system. But the problem isn't liquidity. The problem is solvency. People don't have money. They can't pay their debts. And when people can't pay, banks fail. First quarter 2027. This is where it all breaks. The dollar is at 84. BRICS announces that the unit will now be available for private transactions, not just government trade. This means businesses and individuals in BRICS countries can hold the unit directly. It becomes a competing currency, a gold-backed, blockchain-secured alternative to dollars. And people want it, because unlike the dollar, it's not being printed into oblivion. Capital flight begins. American investors start moving money into gold, into yuan, into the unit, into anything that's not dollars. The U.S. Treasury tries to sell bonds to fund the government, but nobody wants them. China isn't buying. Japan isn't buying. Saudi Arabia isn't buying. Interest rates on new bonds spike to 8%, but even at 8%, there aren't enough buyers. The government is forced to turn to the Federal Reserve. The Fed prints money to buy Treasury bonds. This is monetizing the debt. This is the final stage before hyperinflation. And it's happening in real time. Second quarter 2027. The dollar is at 78. Inflation is at 15% officially. Real inflation is 25%. Gas is $9 per gallon. Bread is $8 per loaf. Rent has doubled in 2 years. People are desperate. They're liquidating retirement accounts just to pay for food. 60% of Americans have zero savings. 40% have defaulted on at least one debt. The unemployment rate is spiking because companies can't afford to operate when their costs are rising 20% per quarter. The Fed has cut rates to zero. It doesn't help. Because the problem isn't interest rates. The problem is the currency is dying. Third quarter 2027. The dollar has lost 50% of its value since January 2026. 85% of Americans are effectively penniless, not because they spent their money foolishly, because their money became worthless. A savings account that had $10,000 in January 2026 can now buy what $5,000 bought back then. Except that's optimistic, because most people didn't have $10,000 to begin with. They had zero. And now they're negative because their debts didn't shrink, your mortgage didn't adjust for inflation, your student loan didn't get cut in half, but your paycheck, if you still have one, buys half what it used to. This is the wealth transfer, the greatest theft in human history. And it's not done through taxes. It's done through inflation, through currency debasement. The government prints money to pay its debts, and you pay the price when your dollars become worthless. Let me show you the historical parallel, because this has happened before. Rome. The Roman Empire ran on the silver denarius. In 64 AD, the denarius was 94% pure silver. By 265 AD, it contained 0.05% silver. It was copper with a thin wash of silver paint. The empire debased the currency to fund endless wars and welfare programs. And the result was prices increased by 1,000%. The savings of the middle class were wiped out. The economy collapsed into barter. The legions refused to accept the currency. They demanded gold or land. When the army stops accepting the money, the empire dies. And Rome fell into 3 centuries of darkness. We are watching the same pattern. The dollar in 1971 was backed by gold. Nixon closed the gold window. Since then, the dollar has lost 98% of its purchasing power. It's not backed by anything except the promise that the government will accept it for taxes. But when the government is insolvent, when it's borrowing $8 billion per day, when it's printing trillions to buy its own debt, that promise is worthless. The dollar is already a debased currency. It's just happening slower than Rome. But the endgame is the same. Now let me address the obvious question. Can't the government stop this? Can't they cut spending, raise taxes, balance the budget? Technically, yes. Realistically, no. To balance the budget right now would require cutting federal spending by 40% or raising taxes by 70%. Neither is politically possible. If they cut spending by 40%, Social Security gets gutted. Medicare disappears. Defense collapses. Millions of government employees lose jobs. The economy crashes immediately. If they raise taxes by 70%, businesses shut down. Investment flees. The economy crashes immediately. There is no painless solution. There is no middle path. They're trapped. And they know it, which is why they're choosing the path of least resistance. Print money, devalue the currency, hope they can hold it together long enough to retire and let the next generation deal with the consequences. Except the consequences are arriving ahead of schedule, because BRICS accelerated the timeline. By building an alternative system, by moving trade outside the dollar, they've removed the artificial support that kept the dollar elevated despite America's debts. Now the dollar's value reflects economic reality, and economic reality is brutal. Here's what you need to understand about 85%. That number isn't chosen randomly. It's based on the current distribution of wealth. Right now, 50% of Americans own less than 2.6% of national wealth. The top 10% own 70% of national wealth. When hyperinflation hits, when the dollar loses half its value or more, the bottom 50% are wiped out completely. They had nothing to begin with. Now they have negative because their debts are denominated in nominal dollars that don't adjust. The next 35%, the middle class, gets devastated. Their savings evaporate. Their retirement accounts, even if invested in stocks, don't keep pace with real inflation. The paper wealth is there, but the purchasing power is gone. Only the top 15% survive. And even then, only if they diversified into hard assets. Gold, silver, real estate, commodities, anything that's not denominated in dollars. This is why you're seeing billionaires flee. 142,000 millionaires emigrated from Western countries in 2025. That's the largest wealth migration in history. They're going to Singapore, to Switzerland, to Dubai, to New Zealand. Why? Because they know what's coming. They have financial advisors who showed them the debt charts, who explained the BRICS payment systems, who calculated the timeline for dollar collapse. And they moved before the exits closed. You don't have that option. You're not getting a golden passport. You're not buying a bunker in New Zealand. But you do have options. You can move your wealth out of dollars. You can invest in productive assets that generate cash flow regardless of currency debasement. You can reduce debt. You can build emergency supplies. You can network with people who understand what's coming. The choices you make right now in 2026 will determine whether you're in the 15% who survive or the 85% who get destroyed. Let me show you what 85% penniless actually looks like. It doesn't mean everyone is homeless. It means 85% of people have effectively no economic power, no savings, no assets, no ability to weather disruptions. They live day to day, dependent on wages that don't keep up with costs. They can't afford medical care. They can't afford their children's education. They can't retire. They work until they physically can't, then they depend on whatever scraps of Social Security haven't been cut. It's not a cliff. It's not everyone falling off a ledge on the same day. It's a grinding poverty that creeps in month by month. It's the feeling of working harder and falling further behind. It's watching your quality of life decline while politicians promise solutions they have no intention of implementing. It's realizing the American dream wasn't a promise. It was a pyramid scheme. And the early entrants got rich while the late entrants got crushed. Now let me show you why 2027 is the critical year. That's when the dollar demand craters. That's when the Treasury auction failures become common. That's when the Fed is forced to print at unprecedented scale. That's when inflation breaks double digits and doesn't come back down. 2027 is the year the old financial system collapses and the new multipolar system replaces it. And if you're holding dollars, if you're trusting dollar-denominated assets, you're on the wrong side of history. Now let me address the counter-argument because I know what you're thinking. This sounds like doomsday prediction. Surely the government has a plan. Surely the Fed knows what they're doing. Surely this can't happen in America. You're right to be skeptical. But consider this. In 2007, if someone told you the housing market would collapse and take down Bear Stearns and Lehman Brothers and require trillions in bailouts, you would have said impossible. The government won't let that happen, but it did happen. In 2020, if someone told you the government would print $15 trillion in 2 years and lock down the entire economy, you would have said impossible. That's not America. But it happened. The impossible keeps happening because the system is breaking. Each crisis is bigger than the last. Each response requires more money printing. Each round of money printing makes the next crisis worse. We're in a doom loop, and the only way out is collapse and reset. The question isn't if, the question is when. And based on the timeline I've shown you, based on the debt spiral, the when is 2027. Here's what you need to do right now. If you have a mortgage, consider whether you want to pay it off early or let inflation erode it. That's a complex calculation. But generally, reducing debt reduces risk. Second, diversify out of dollars. I'm not saying sell everything and buy gold tomorrow, but start moving a portion of your savings into assets that aren't denominated in dollars. Bitcoin if you understand the technology, productive businesses, anything that holds value independently of the dollar system. Third, build emergency supplies, food, water, medicine, essentials. Not because society is collapsing tomorrow, but because when inflation hits, when supply chains disrupt, when prices spike, you want 3 to 6 months of runway. You want the ability to weather disruptions without panic. Fourth, increase your income. I know that's easier said than done, but whether it's a side business, a second job, learning new skills, anything that increases your earning power increases your options. When inflation is running at 20%, a 5% raise is a pay cut. You need to be increasing income faster than costs, or you're losing ground. Fifth, network. Connect with people who understand what's coming. Build community. Because when systems fail, when governments fail, when money fails, the thing that survives is relationships. The people you can trust, the people you can trade with, the people who will help you when official channels break down. This is not financial advice. I'm not a licensed advisor. I'm someone who reads the data and connects the dots and sees the same pattern that has destroyed every fiat currency in history. From Rome to Weimar Germany to Zimbabwe to Venezuela, the pattern is always the same. Government runs deficits. Government prints money. Currency loses value. Prices explode. Middle class gets wiped out. Only people holding hard assets survive. We are in the middle stages of this pattern. The debt is unsustainable. The money printing is accelerating. The foreign abandonment of the dollar is happening. The inflation is rising. The only stage left is the collapse. And the collapse happens when the majority realize what's happening and panic. When everyone tries to get out of dollars at the same time. That's the bank run moment. That's when the government implements capital controls to prevent you from moving your money. That's when they freeze accounts and limit withdrawals and force you to take the loss. You have a window, maybe 6 months, maybe 12. But the window is closing. And once it closes, you're stuck holding currency that is worth half what it was and assets that you can't access. 85% of Americans will be penniless by 2027 because 85% of Americans are either already penniless or holding their wealth in dollars or dollar-denominated assets. The statistics are clear. 59% can't cover a $1,000 emergency right now. That's 61% of the population that's already at zero. Add in the people with savings. But it's all in bank accounts or 401ks denominated in dollars. That's another 24% who think they're safe but aren't. Because when the dollar collapses, your 401k number might stay the same or even go up. But what it can buy collapses. If you have $100,000 in your retirement account today and it grows to $120,000 by 2027, you're not wealthier. You're poorer. Because that $120,000 will buy what $60,000 buys today. Maybe less. The number is meaningless. The purchasing power is what matters. And purchasing power is being destroyed by design. This is the final warning. Not because there won't be other warnings, but because this is the last warning before the timeline runs out. The debt is growing at $8 billion per day. The dollar fell 9% in 2025. BRICS systems go live in 2027. The math is inexorable. The outcome is inevitable. The only question is whether you prepare or whether you freeze, whether you act on information or whether you hope it goes away. Hope is not a strategy. Denial is not protection. 85% will do nothing. They'll read this and think it's interesting and go back to their lives and be blindsided when their world collapses. Don't be in the 85%. Be in the 15% who saw it coming and acted. The clock is ticking. The window is closing. And history will not be kind to those who ignored the warnings. 2027 is closer than you think. And when it arrives, when the system breaks, when your dollars are worthless, don't say you weren't told. You're being told right now. The question is, are you listening?